Hello and welcome to the Gaggle Woke Challenge, and if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. So, Peter, there are ugly rumors and ugly tales that we're hearing about, that all is not right in the garden of the West. You know,
the Rose Garden.
Yeah, the gardeners seem to have taken a sabbatical, and the rare plants, otherwise known as the European Union, of course, and the United States, are at loggerheads. And the European Union believes, shock horror, that the United States is exploiting the war in Ukraine and taking advantage of the Europeans, which is quite shocking. And instead of transatlantic unity that we're supposed to talk about, they, on the contrary, are seeing how much they can pocket and as fast as possible, which is so un-American. So I want to show you an article. It's a long article in Politico magazine, which expresses some alarm about this situation. So here we have the headline: Europe accuses the U.S. of profiting from war.
Fake news, George. Fake news.
Fake news. This is Putin disinformation. EU officials attack Joe Biden over sky-high gas prices, weapon sales, and trade as Vladimir Putin's war threatens to destroy Western unity. So apparently Putin's goal should be to maintain Western unity. Instead, he is being very malevolent and is trying to break Western unity. So the article then continues and says the top European officials are furious with the Biden administration and accuse Americans of making a fortune from the war. Because, it's something Americans have never done in the past, rob everyone blind and use war to make a bundle. I mean, it's such an unheard of concept.
And then make the taxpayers pay for rebuilding, right?
And exactly, that's right. And then, one senior official is being quoted here. The fact is, if you look at it soberly, the country that is most profiting from this war is the U.S. because they are selling more gas and at higher prices, and because they are selling more weapons. So, it wasn't maybe such a great idea to cut off the flow of cheap Russian gas. I mean, well, hey, look what happened. America's now raking in the bucks.
that American gas has a moral fiber to it, as opposed to
Russian gas is
moral gas.
It's immoral.
Okay. This is part of the whole woke agenda here, that there is moral natural gas and there is immoral natural gas.
Right.
Thought I would just interject that, George.
Yeah, no, I kind of agree with it. It's part of the moral ontology. I mean, Aquinas wrote a great deal about different types of gas, and he said that some gases were more moral than others. He was a long part of the Summa Theologica.
But the Western world collectively has a lot of gas bags. I think you've noticed.
I think so. gas bags. There's no shortage of that. Yes, prices are at rock bottom. The explosive comments, backed in public and private by officials, diplomats, and ministers, follow mounting anger in Europe over American subsidies that threaten to wreck European industry.
This is the Inflation Reduction Act.
Exactly, Inflation Reduction Act. The Kremlin is likely to welcome the poisoning of the atmosphere among Western allies. Exactly, rubbing their hands with glee. And the biggest point of tension in recent weeks has been the Biden's green subsidies and taxes that Brussels says unfairly tilt trade away from the EU and threaten to destroy European industries.
Well, of course it does. That's the point.
Exactly. And of course, the question arises, well, first of all, why did you think America would not do this? Second cause, why don't you do it? I mean, it's like, whining about what somebody else is doing. Okay, you subsidize your industry. Why are you worried about what they're doing? Focus more on what you should be doing. Here's that. As they attempt to reduce their reliance on Russian energy, EU countries are turning to gas from the US instead. Well, yeah. But the price Europeans pay is almost 4 times as high as the same fuel cost in America.
George, where's the price cap on that?
What's the price? Yes, quite. Yes.
No.
Yes.
If you're going to put a price cap on Russia, why don't you put a price cap on the US?
Yes, I think it definitely should. Yes, right. Because I mean, if you talk about unfair profiting, which is what they're accusing Russia of, unfair profiting, having imposed the sanctions, it's unfair that they're making more money than before. Then you do it to the United States. Hey, they're making more money than before. It's jolly unfair. So then there's the likely surge in orders for American-made military kit as European armies run short after sending weapons to Ukraine.
Pure coincidence, George. Pure coincidence.
What a shock. So, and then it says, this is very funny. When EU leaders tackled Biden over high US gas prices at the G20 meeting in Bali, the American president simply seemed unaware of the issue.
It's kind of one of these things, George. Watch. Okay, this is how I see it.
Yeah, exactly. But of course, if you remember back in the 80s, Ronald Reagan had this wonderful knack of walking away. Exactly. Sorry, can't hear.
Yeah, that helicopter always helped, didn't it?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Other EU officials and diplomats agreed that American ignorance about the consequences for Europe was a major problem. Ignorance.
It's not ignorance. It's not ignorance.
Exactly. Yeah, sorry, look, suddenly Biden, where am I? Where's my milk and cookies? The growing dispute over Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, a huge tax, climate, and healthcare package, has put fears over a transatlantic trade war high on the political agenda again. EU trade ministers are due to discuss their response on Friday, which is today, as officials in Brussels draw up plans for an emergency war chest of subsidies to save European industries from collapse. So European
So you're going to go into further debt. Okay, yeah, that's the good thing to do. That's smart. That's smart. Okay, the most indebted part of the world, and you rely upon more debt. Great, smart, real smart, guys.
That's right. That's right. And as says, cheaper energy has quickly become a huge competitive advantage for American companies. Businesses are planning new investments in the US, or even relocating their existing businesses away from Europe to American factories. They are taking advantage of the cheaper energy available in the United States. Again, might not have been such a great idea to cut yourself off from cheap energy from Russia, but hey, that's just me. I mean,
and George, as they're having this conversation, the deadline to cut off all crude oil from Russia is still looming. That we haven't reached out. They're having this conversation,
right?
And they still haven't got to the point where, and they're gonna beat their chest. Yeah, we've finally cut it off, and they're having this conversation simultaneously. I mean, which side of the brain is talking to the other? Maybe they're not.
That's exactly right. Because Josep Borrell is boasting. He gave an interview the other day in which he was boasting. We have now cut ourselves off from Russian gas almost entirely. We're only 7% of our gas needs comes from Russia. So we've gone from 40% to 7%. Great. And you basically, you're losing all your industries. They're just moving out of Europe. You've done a good job there.
But it's always times of the turn down where you see the truth. Okay, John Maynard Keynes said that about the Great Depression. You see all the fraud, you see the fraudsters, and you see the corruption and all that. And we're seeing it again. We're seeing this FTX thing is a good example. When you get into a bear market, you see what's really going on. And so it really belays the past belief, maybe a belief that you and I actually held at one time, is that it was European ingenuity that made it rich. Oh, I guess it was just cheap energy.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So, just this week, chemical multinational Solvay announced that it's choosing the US over Europe for new investments in the latest of a series of similar announcements from key EU industrial giants. So you created this entity, this EU entity, to be a competitor to the United States. That was the idea, that you would now be able to take on the United States in key cutting-edge industries, and you're basically saying, no, you've lost. All your key cutting-edge industries are leaving Europe.
So here's the plan, folks. Totally gut and destroy Ukraine and deindustrialize Europe. Mission accomplished.
That's right. Exactly. And then for Biden, the legislation is a historic climate achievement. And then it says, but the EU sees that differently. An official from France's Foreign Affairs Ministry said the diagnosis is clear. These are discriminatory subsidies that will distort competition. Amazing. Yeah. Americans have never done this. Always altruistic. Always, hey, I want the other guy to make money. The last thing I want to do is make money. I want the other guy to make money.
No, actually, George, it was the case for quite a long time after the Second World War, where the U.S. and Donald Trump pointed this out, maybe not directly, but they got a good deal. But as Europe became more and more competitive, then a lot of Americans are saying, well, we're giving away the farm here, so we've got to tighten up here. But see, what they're doing is
right. But keep in mind, there's the other part of what Trump was saying, which is, as a result of doing that, we deindustrialized, but some people got rich. I mean, in other words, it was, what happened when you deindustrialize is that the ordinary middle class in the United States did badly, but the wealthy did very well. It led to the financialization of the economy. And, hey, the big giants were still doing well. It's just that their plants were overseas, not in the United States.
What I'm saying is, going back to the quote, discriminatory subsidies that will distort competition. That's exactly right. I mean, it is a political tool, and it is applied in different places at different times. And George is absolutely right. I mean, this just a good trade deal for the Europeans was made at the expense of the Americans, but the Americans made that all around the Western-controlled world. Okay, right. So I mean, it's building up the industries of your quote-unquote allies, but then it went even further. It went to China, it went to Indonesia, it went to Vietnam.
Right. Yeah. No. Exactly. And that was the thing with Japan. Japan, in return for allowing Japan to become an industrial giant, they got Japan as basically a wholly owned subsidiary of the United States, became a key part of the US-led security system. Now Japan is just a satellite of the United States. In return, they allowed Japan's industries to thrive at the expense of American industries. So it says that French economy minister Bruno Le Maire this week even accused the US of going down China's path of economic isolationism, urging Brussels to replicate such an approach. Europe must not be. It's a bit late in the day, exactly. Europe must not be the last of the Mohicans. Well, but again, it is, why didn't you do this earlier? I mean, the whole point of the EU was, hey, we can't take on the Americans because we're all divided up in all these little countries. We need a kind of a whole continent-wide system so that we would have our, be able to direct our subsidies to key industries that could then rival those of the United States. So, now you suddenly, in 2022, you suddenly wake up that hasn't been accomplished.
Well, yeah, I think in many ways, George, they were deluding themselves, particularly the Germans, because they thought through hook or crook or good luck or whatever that they would get Nord Stream 2 online. Okay. Right. And so you can kind of, they're in their unicorn world, these people with their neoliberal ideology. If we can just get this cheap energy from Russia, we can keep playing the game. Okay. And so the destruction of that pipeline, well, it was 8 weeks ago. It's not part of the historical record because nobody really wants to talk about it. Right. But that is a pivot point. It's a huge pivot point, and we're getting it right now. They're finally waking up to the reality that they have boxed themselves in. They have no exit. And leadership, as I've said on this podcast repeatedly, a good leader always leaves him or himself options. They have left themselves with no option.
Well, that's it. See, what happened with Merkel is that she refused to choose. It should have been obvious to her that she needed to choose. Either you want to be an economic powerhouse, in which case you're going to need to have good relations with Russia. Not just because of cheap energy, but because it's a great market, it's a great source for investment. Or you want to stick with the Americans and keep going down this whole path of NATO, Transatlantic alliance, and so on. She chose not to choose. She just, punted along, saying one thing to Putin, something else to whoever was the US president. And that's why ultimately Germany is in the mess that it's in. I mean, the Germans want to put, Merkel, she was too pro-Putin. No, the truth is Merkel wasn't anything. I mean, that's why the Germans are in the mess they're in.
It's absolutely right, George, because again, I don't want to sound too philosophical or anything, but the whole pan-European security arrangement, one of the reasons why it's in the tatters that it is that the German question has never been resolved. Right. Okay. So we went with keep the Russians out, the Germans down, and the Americans in. That is still in play in many ways, but it was supposed to be ideologically driven. No, it's geopolitically driven. Right. Okay, and the biggest loser is Germany again.
That's right. That's exactly right. And that was it, because Germany, refused to make a key decision that it should have at the end of the Cold War, and instead it just went along with a NATO alliance that did not serve German interests, and the German public knows it's not serving its interests. But she went along with it, because she just wanted an easy life rather than confront the Americans, which is what she should have done, but she didn't. And then basically she just handed this mess over to this mediocre regional bank manager, Sergeant Schultz, who just simply sat on his hands when Americans just destroyed Nord Stream 2. I mean, right there, right in front of him, just to show him how much contempt they had for him.
As we had the European Economic Community, as it morphed into the European Union, the Europeans could take a side on Vietnam, for example, or Tony Blair. We don't want to alienate the American. Don't want to be on the wrong side of the Americans on an issue. Go along with Iraq. Go along with Afghanistan. Go along with Libya. Go along with Syria. But now it's the farm. Okay, I mean, you can have all these trade-offs all you want, and you can just pretend. Okay, that it doesn't really matter. It's an American agenda. They're losing their troops. It's their debt, their issue. We're marginal players. We'll get by on a marginal way. Now it's come straight. It's come home, front and center. And George is absolutely right. They chose wrong.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And then says here, the EU is preparing its responses, such as a big subsidy push to prevent European industry from being wiped out by American rivals.
Yeah, but George, but where's the cheap energy? I'm sorry, you can't. A subsidy isn't going to resolve it. Where's the energy? You can't print energy. You can print debt.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Absolutely. Exactly. You haven't solved your main problem, which is your energy. You need if you're going to be an industrial powerhouse, you're going to need a lot of energy. And you haven't solved that problem. As you say, you're paying 4 times as much as the Americans are, and the Americans like it that way.
And on top of everyone, there's much fanfare in the German media that they have these new floating refineries, not LNG refineries. George, I may be wrong in my number right off the top of my head. That's only going to cover 20% of their needs, and it's still 4 or 5 times the price.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, you're exactly right. And we have to say that we foresaw this right at the beginning. I mean, it's not like, they seem to be realizing it now, but you and I at the Gaggle talked about these LNG terminals that doesn't solve your problems. I mean, that's if you're going to be paying, 4 times. I mean, I think that was pretty much what we estimated, that's going to cost them 4 times as much as they would be paying otherwise.
And if you look at Qatar and Kuwait and these other countries that are natural gas rich, I mean, why would they, for any reason whatsoever, prioritize Europe over other customers?
No.
Why? Why would they?
No. And
also, and these countries also, going what Russia had been preaching for eons, is that natural gas, the vast majority of it in the international market, is long-term contracts. So there's sometimes a little bit there, okay, and then it goes on the spot market, and it's horrendously expensive. But Europe is now sitting at the child's chair, trying to pick up the most expensive scraps from the entire industry.
That's it. That's exactly right. And one should also say that this attempt to put a price on oil, this oil price cap, and down the road they want to create a gas price cap, is really, really pissing off Qatar and OPEC and all of the Gulf states, because they don't want to create a situation in which buyers create a cartel. They think, hey, producers can create a cartel, or producers can set prices according to the market or whatever. But they're not going to accept a situation in which the buyers say, well, we're creating a cartel and we're going to set the prices. So so therefore they're not getting Europeans aren't getting a very sympathetic hearing in Qatar.
Well, then maybe we should have a price cap on American military weapon systems exported around the world. Okay, you want to play price caps? Let's play it, George. I mean, you've already said it, and it's something that they wake up like it's an epiphany. Oh, it could distort market forces. Yeah, yeah. And you have Qatar, you have Saudi Arabia, Kuwait. Like, why are you pulling us into this Ukraine thing? What does this have to do with us?
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So this is from the Financial Times, because this is also the lead story today in the Financial Times, and it talks about the IRA, this Inflation Reduction Act. Says this financial, it comes into force on January the 1st. But several EU companies have already said they will choose the US rather than the EU for their next investment. Energy prices are far lower in the US, adding a further pull factor. So that's the FT today weighing in. So basically, you still got your problem, even with your subsidies, which is, EU companies are moving their operations to the US.
And under Biden, keep this in mind, everyone. Yes, energy is cheaper in the United States relative to Europe, but it's twice as much now in the United States since the advent of the Biden administration. That's how terrified European companies are to remain competitive, or they just shut their doors.
Yeah, and the fact that the energy prices have declined a little bit in the United States, that's no great credit to the US, especially because Biden has been dipping into the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which has driven down prices. But there's also a recession. I mean, the fears of a recession. Clearly, in Europe and the United States, the economies are moving into a recession. What happens in recession? Well, of course, energy prices go down. So there's not because, Biden's been pursuing this very good policy that the energy prices are lower now. Not obviously not when he came to power, but they're lower now than they were 3-4 months ago. That's no credit to him.
And with the impending recession, to what degree it will be a deep one or not, we don't know. But when there's the perception that a recession is on the horizon, you stop investment in companies, you start laying off people, you're not hiring people, you're not putting money into R&D. I mean, it has a cascade effect. Okay.
Right. Exactly. And then it says here that some EU members, such as France, have called for Brussels to replicate the US Act with a buy-European subsidy regime of its own. German Economy Minister Robert Habeck has also suggested increased subsidies. And then even Ireland, one of the most staunch allies of the US in the EU, warned of consequences without a swift solution. Leo Varadkar, Deputy Prime Minister, said, oh, there'll be a response from the EU. Nobody wants to get into a tet-for-tat for a subsidy raise, but what the US has done really is not consistent with the principles of free trade and free competition. Wow. I mean, and when does the US ever practice the principle of free trade and fair competition? I mean, it embraced free trade after World War II, because by then it was a sort of, it was into its America's advantage. Up until then, it was always pursued a very protectionist line. I mean, they were the most protectionist country in the world. American
industrial might was invented off the back of tariffs, everyone.
Yeah. Not consistent with the principles of free trade and fair competition. Well, you tell that next time you meet Joe Biden. Free trade. As you said, where am I? Yeah. So anyway, this is this is back to the Politico article. It says, behind the scenes, there is also growing irritation about the money flowing into the American defense sector. It says, the US has by far been the largest provider of military aid to Ukraine, supplying more than $15.2 billion in weapons and equipment since the start of the war. The EU has so far provided about $8 billion euros of military equipment to Ukraine. According to one senior official from a European capital, restocking of some sophisticated weapons may take years because of problems in the supply chain and the production of chips. This has fueled fears that the US defense industry, can profit even more from the war.
Also, this article doesn't mention that the arms industry, in a modern industrialized country, is energy very, very intensive.
Right.
Okay.
Very intensive, yes. That's right. But again, what's interesting is whatever happened to that European defense industry. Remember, we kept hearing about how the Europeans were going to build up a European defense industry to rival Boeing and McDonnell Douglas, Lockheed. We're going to create these things. Well, apparently they're completely dependent on the Americans, and the Americans apparently it's going to take them years to replenish the stocks in Europe. At a nice little profit margin as well for the American defense industry.
But the propaganda is, George, transatlantic unity, transatlantic. Okay. It's really amazing. I mean, and how people, and see that whole propaganda spiel, it does have its impact. So, and when people see this, but what about unity? It's like, it's far more. No, it's who gets paid.
Right.
And this whole conflict in Ukraine, it's about who gets paid.
Right. That's right. That's it. So that's the state of the garden, the Josep Borrell garden, and a
lot of weeds there, George. A lot of weeds.
That's right, and you really get a sense here that that they kind of went into this really without thinking through all of the consequences. We did, but apparently Ursula von der Leyen and Josep Borrell and Sergeant Schultz and Emmanuel Macron didn't really think it through. And what is more, they're still going along with this. They, as time goes on, rather than sitting down and rethinking this, they're going. I mean, I read today. There's Wolfgang Schäuble, the former, CDU kind of senior figure, is attacking Angela Merkel for being too pro-Putin. Meanwhile, the Social Democrats are attacking their own veteran Social Democrat leaders, Brandt and Schmidt, for having been too friendly towards the Soviet Union. There's no thinking through. I mean, you're attacking people who actually had some sensible idea that it doesn't make a great deal of sense to have a war or a conflict with Russia. It just doesn't serve German interests.
It's even worse, George. It's even worse than that. So It's all bicker about who should or shouldn't have talked to the Russians over the last 30 years. Go ahead, have a long conversation, have schnapps if you want, okay? But the bigger question is, why weren't you thinking about yourselves?
Right.
Okay.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, this is classical. This is this whole low octane thinking generation. They what they need to do. I see it all the time. Weak thinking people try to blame someone else. No, take personal responsibility for what you've done. That's the first step towards fixing things. Now, as far as the European Union and its industrial policy is concerned, monetary policy, the whole world, it's done. It's done. Okay, you can't undo this here. Okay, because you need cheap energy to solve these problems. Okay, if they had cheap energy, that's your first step to solving it, and it could be. Okay, if you stop relying upon your great friend in America. Okay, we've heard this. It's so schizophrenic. Europe needs to have its own economic presence in the world. We have to be together to deal with China. And then with the Americans. And then the defense policy and rapid deployment. All these sexy things, right. And it's all you and I have talked about it. Slop. It's all slop.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Because of course. When they talk about, America is subsidizing its industries, I mean, and I think the Americans are going to suffer from it. I mean, because they're just throwing a lot of money into industries that have no proven track record of being successsul. I mean, again,
like Boeing.
Yeah, Boeing, but also all these, particularly these green industries. There's no evidence that they're going to be successful or money-making operation. But that's what Americans do. They throw a lot of money and waste a lot of money. That's what they've always done. But rather than complain about that, you got to think about your own industries. Do your own subsidies. But as you say, the first things first, you got to get your energy sorted out because. Yeah, you should subsidize your own industry. You should build up your own industries. But what are you going to do? I mean, if you don't have cheap energy, then I don't know how the hell are you going to do that?
Yeah, there's no thinking ahead, not understanding the consequences of decisions. Because again, I sound like a broken record. They're all driven by an ideology. They're not driven by pedestrian facts on the ground. Like. Do the lights work? Is it warm enough? Right. Do we have enough food? I mean, it doesn't get more pedestrian than that, George. Right. And when you think of what a government is supposed to do, basic social tranquility. Right. I mean, I think that's getting, in the broadest way, make sure people when they're not at each other's throats. I mean, there's a modicum of comfort in living everyday life, where you don't want to live in a society where people worry about if they have to choose between petrol and food. I mean, I thought the garden was in a better shape than that, George.
No, that's exactly right. And so when you read articles such as this one at Politico or the Financial Times, it's still a matter of arranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. I mean, we're going to subsidize, we're going to bring it up with the Americans, we're going to tell Biden next time we see him, we're very unhappy. But how about rethinking your main problem? Your main problem is that you've got yourself into a war from which you derive no benefits and suffer great losses. And that you're not rethinking. That part of it is you're not rethinking and saying essentially that's it. No more. We're out of here. Instead, you're arguing. We're gonna really tell Biden, what for next time he picks up the phone to talk to us.
So getting into a war that you have no interest in, which there's only downside for you, and then your transatlantic partner in the United States turns around and literally stabs you in the back. Okay, all of these European leaders should be fired. Okay, just total criminal incompetence. Right. Criminal incompetence.
Yeah. Okay? Exactly. I mean, there are going to be some demonstrations, I think, in Europe this weekend, but they're not enough. There has to be really get these serious protests. Because what they have done is indeed criminal. I mean, they stuck their people with the bill for their idiocies. I mean, here's the bill. You will be paying this. We'll be all right, but you will pay this bill.
Meanwhile, who blew up the Nord Stream pipelines?
Yeah.
Who did that? No, there's no interest in it, George. Is it on the front page of anything right now? No.
That's right. Yeah. No.
The greatest industrial sabotage in modern history, and no one is talking about it.
That's right. Exactly. You read these magazines like Politico. Nothing. There's never any story about that. It's gone. Remember, the first few days, there were all these German politicians in particular accusing Russia. Russia did this. Russia did it. Remember, even Americans were saying, yeah, Russia did it. Where no one's saying that anymore. Exactly. Imagine, that's just gone. No one's accusing Russia. It's just vanished. The story has just disappeared. As you say, I guess we'll never know. Just one of those mysteries, one for the ages.
So just, turn off the lights if there's any lights before you lock the door. You're done.
Yeah.
You're done.
Yeah.
Okay. There's no getting out. See, Europeans are going to have to learn to live in a poorer, less money, less competitive. It'll be less, the garden will be less and less attractive.
Right.
Okay. Because apparently their values created this, George. Their values created this mess.
Right. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
That's why George and I do not adhere to those values.
No,
okay,
they're definitely not. Yes,
because it's a one-way ticket to misery, poverty, fear, and a brutish life. Okay,
right. That's exactly right. It's values rather than what political leaders are supposed to think about, which is their national interest. What is I've been tasked, I've been elected by these people to be their elected representative and to serve their interests. I'm not really here as a champion of values. No one's appointed me to be a cardinal to talk about values. I'm supposed to be a political leader accountable to the public. They don't think in those. They want to talk about values.
With your explanation, that makes you a classic Putin apologist. Okay,
exactly.
There we go. Yep. See, the discourse is just circular. You can't have an interrogative. You can't argue with it.
Right.
You can't yell at it. You can't do anything.
Exactly.
It's like a castle floating in the sky.
Right.
It's really amazing. It's impenetrable.
It's impenetrable. So even when you get a new political leader like Giorgia Meloni, she wins an election and says, "Oh, I'm down for the whole everything. Oh yeah, Putin, embodiment of evil. Count me in. Sanctions. So so they'll let her. Okay. You want to talk about families and abortion? Fine, go ahead, talk about that. Immigration, well, less so because that kind of gets her into a mess with France. But she knows what she mustn't bring up. That is the policy on Ukraine. That she knows, and she stays very well away from that. So they'll let her play around talking about children and families and mothers and fathers. Okay, go ahead, play with your little toys.
That's right. You turn the thermostat down and wear 2 sweaters. Okay. Don't use public transportation. Right. God forbid, don't go out at night because there are no lights on the street.
Nope.
Okay. Have all the conversations you want. Okay. All right, everybody. That's that today was a rant. That was a good one too.
Yes.
All right. This is the Gaggle with Peter and George. We're on local, so please go to thegaggle.locals.com. Please visit our store. And I'm sorry, the drought has begun.
Yes, it's this brutal. The brutal weekend. It's a long weekend. This Thanksgiving weekend, but it's like this. So you have to wait a long, painful time till Tuesday. 3 p.m. Eastern time for my locals live stream. Please join me on Tuesday. Come with comments, criticisms, suggestions, and keep in mind Buddy, because Buddy is thinking, where's my subsidy? He's thinking, well, if the EU is handing out these subsidies, where's mine? And so he needs to be subsidized, and because that
he needs a tip jar enhancement.
Exactly, enhancing his tip jar, because it just isn't cutting it. So if you've got a few bob in your pocket, whip them out, dunk them in his tip jar. That'll keep him quiet for a while, and he gets very, very mean when he starts getting noisy. So we're very grateful for all of your help and friendship and support. the more you're able to donate, the more of these videos we can make, the more we can improve the technology, and above all, the more likely it is that he will at least be, happy for a short while. So remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye.